one day it clicked in my brain as I started doing these burnout events called Cleetus and Cars. I was like, man, if you think about it, it's just a little stadium. If it had a burnout pad in the middle, it'd be a little burnout stadium.
Mm-hmm. The world knows Cleetus McFarland as the fearless king of horsepower. But few realize how close Garrett Mitchell came to losing everything. Nearly $1 million. Vanished into a crumbling racetrack, a fan was permanently injured during a burnout show. And federal agents appeared at his door. Behind the wild persona lay fear, pressure, and heartbreak. This video uncovers the emotional truth, how the Freedom Factory dream nearly destroyed him, from financial collapse and lawsuits to crashes, investigations, and the toll that ultimately shaped Garrett's redemption. The bet that broke him. When Garrett Mitchell first stepped onto the cracked pavement of the abandoned DeSoto Speedway in early 2020, he did not see the weeds, the broken fencing, or the rust slowly eating away at the forgotten oval. He saw a dream. He saw the birthplace of something bold, something loud, something that could change his life forever. To most people, the property looked like a ghost town that should have been bulldozed. To Garrett, it looked like a chance to create the Freedom Factory, a place where he could build wild machines, host massive shows, and film the kind of content no one else could. But dreams like this rarely come cheap. The price was a staggering $850,000, a number far bigger than anything he had ever taken on. Instead of walking away, he pushed everything he had onto the table. He drained savings accounts he had quietly built over a decade. He sold personal vehicles, tools, and equipment that had sentimental value. He opened new lines of credit and maxed out the ones he already had. This was not a calculated business deal. This was a raw gamble driven by faith, adrenaline, and a belief that if anyone could revive a dead racetrack, it was him. When he signed the contract, he smiled for the camera, acting like it was the greatest day of his life. But deep down, he knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross. What he did not know was that the world was about to shut down. Within weeks, the global pandemic hit with full force. The events he planned to host were suddenly illegal. The grandstands had to stay empty. And a track with no events has no income. It became a sinking ship he had to somehow save it with his bare hands. That is not an exaggeration. Crew members often found him alone on the property, sleeping in the infield, hammering loose boards, trimming weeds, and editing videos inside a tiny trailer. There were no cheering crowds. No roaring burnout pits, no sponsors lining up to help. It was just Garrett, the decaying track, and a list of bills that grew longer every day. Property taxes demanded payment. Insurance fees for a facility of that size were brutal. Payroll for his small team had to be met, whether the videos performed well or not. Every morning, he woke up to a new expense he could not avoid. Every night, he went to sleep wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The man who proudly shouted about freedom was now trapped inside a debt that felt like a tightening chain. Little did he know that the financial pressure was only the first blow. Something far more frightening was already heading his way, and it carried the full weight of the federal government. IRS at the door as the months passed, the pressure around Garrett Mitchell tightened until it felt like the walls of the Freedom Factory were closing in. The empty grandstands haunted him every time he walked the cracked pavement. Bills stacked up faster than he could shovel through them. Property taxes demanded payment, insurance rates climbed. And the cost of simply keeping the lights on grew heavier by the week. What should have been the birth of a dream started to feel like the slow death of one. And then came the financial mistake that pushed him into true danger. One morning, after another long night of editing videos in a haze of exhaustion, Garrett received a call he would never forget. It was the Internal Revenue Service. His quarterly tax payment had bounced. He had overdrawn his account. without realizing it. To anyone else, bouncing a check might seem like a simple bank issue. But when the check belongs to the federal government, the consequences are serious. The IRS does not shrug off mistakes. They investigate them. They respond with penalties, interest, and the threat of asset seizure. When Garrett heard the voice on the other end of the phone, his heart dropped. He later admitted that his hands shook as the agent explained what had happened. It was a moment that stripped away the Cleetus personality and left only Garrett, the stressed, an exhausted young man, trying to hold together a business on the verge of collapse. He had spent everything on the track, expecting to make it back through events, sponsorships, and content. Instead, he found himself staring at numbers that did not add up, watching money disappear before he even had time to earn it. Every new video felt like a desperate attempt to plug another hole in a sinking ship. And during this time, YouTube offered no relief. Advertisers pulled back as the pandemic spread, and the platform shifted toward softer, comforting videos instead of burnout clips and race cars. Revenue dropped so sharply that Garrett found himself working twice as hard for half the income. Some days he filmed all morning, fixed broken equipment all afternoon, and edited until sunrise just to keep up. Friends noticed the change in him. They described him as gaunt, worn down, and lost in his own head. He smoked more than usual. He second-guessed every decision. He stopped sleeping. Every missed payment felt like a countdown to disaster. Every letter from the IRS reminded him that one wrong step could cost him the Freedom Factory, his channel, and everything he had spent years building. It was a level of stress no camera ever captured. And as the financial storm grew darker, Garrett had no idea that something far more tragic was waiting for him at one of his first big events. But before he could catch his breath, a freak accident at one of his first comeback events would leave a fan scarred for life. The burnout pit disaster the Freedom Factory was supposed to be Cleetus's triumph, a place where smoke, engines, and chaos blended into a controlled spectacle. But the burnout pit, the arena meant to symbolize fan-fueled energy and unfiltered horsepower, instead became the stage for the darkest moment of his career. What began as a high-octane crowd-pleaser, a signature event designed to bring people together, spiraled into an accident that would haunt Garrett for years. It was fast, violent, and unforgettable. For all the wrong reasons. And no matter how many times he replayed the footage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he should have seen it coming. On that blistering summer day, the pit was overflowing with energy, fans pressed against safety rails, phones up, cheering his cars shredded tires into thick plumes of white smoke. The noise, the heat, the vibration in the stands. It all created a pressure cooker of adrenaline. Drivers pushed harder, faster, wilder. And Garrett encouraged it, believing everyone knew their limits. But the truth was, nobody really knew what the limits were. Not until someone crossed them. The smoke was so dense that visibility dropped to nearly zero. Spectators at the edge couldn't see where the cars were or even how close danger really lurked. A driver, blinded and overwhelmed, lost control of his car. Within seconds, the vehicle snapped sideways, hopped the concrete edge, and slammed into the barrier where fans had been leaning forward for a better view. Screaming, confusion, and chaos swallowed the pit. Garrett's heart stopped. For one terrifying moment, he thought he'd just watched a fan die. The aftermath was worse than the impact. A young fan collapsed, injuring his spine. Another suffered severe burns from flying debris and scalding tire fragments. Paramedics rushed in. The cheering crowd fell silent. Cameras that had been recording for fun captured the horror in detail. And when Garrett ran toward the scene, the pit felt less like a celebration and more like a crime scene he never meant to create. The lawsuit came quickly. The family of the Burn fan accused Garrett of negligence, inadequate safety barriers, and failing to control the event. Lawyers demanded answers. Reporters smelled blood. The Freedom Factories. Insurance company panicked. Fans who once idolized Cleetus now questioned him publicly, flooding comment sections with anger, fear, and blame. But the worst part wasn't the lawsuit or the backlash. It was Garrett's guilt, raw, suffocating, and undeniable. He replayed the screams in his head every night, wondering whether his obsession with pushing the limits had finally gone too far. Yet even at his lowest, Garrett refused to run. Instead, he rebuilt the pit from the ground up, invested in top-tier safety systems, and met privately with the injured fan's family. Redemption wouldn't erase what happened, but it would define what came next. The disaster changed him, forever reshaping how he saw risk, responsibility, and the real cost of entertainment. And while he tried to protect others, he couldn't escape the danger himself. The next disaster would send him flying through the air at nearly 200 miles per hour. The crash that shook him. The crash didn't start with a mistake. It started with confidence, Cleetus-level confidence, the kind that builds after hundreds of passes, thousands of launches, and years of believing you can muscle your way through anything with enough throttle. It was supposed to be another wild run for the fans. Another moment where Garrett Mitchell proved he could keep the car on the edge without crossing the line. But on that day, the line moved, and he didn't see it until it was too late. The car, a brutally powerful, borderline unpredictable monster, was already fighting him before the run began. Track temperature was rising, tires were temperamental, and the tune was more aggressive than he admitted to anyone. Garrett brushed off the signs. He had driven worse. He had fought through sketchier setups. And the crowd was eager. The cameras were rolling. That combination had always pushed him to deliver, even when his gut whispered caution. The moment he launched, something felt off. The rear tires bit too hard. The chassis twisted violently, and the steering wheel jerked in his hands. Instead of backing out, instinct told him to correct, pedal it, and keep going. It was the instinct of an entertainer, not a survivor. Within seconds, the car snapped sideways and rocketed toward the wall. The world turned into noise, wind, and helpless momentum as the vehicle lifted, slammed, and tumbled in. A blur of shattered fiberglass and ripping metal. When the wreck finally stopped moving, the silence was terrifying. Smoke hissed from the engine bay. Fuel dripped. Debris rained down. Garrett's ears rang as if he were underwater. Pain shot through his ribs, back, and neck. He tried to breathe, but it felt like the air had been crushed out of his chest along with the front of the car. The cockpit cage, built for exactly this moment, was the only reason he wasn't dead. Rescue teams sprinted across the track. Fans watched in frozen horror. Some cried. Some prayed. Others filmed because they didn't know what else to do. Inside the twisted wreck, Garrett thought about everything except racing. He thought about his family, his team, and weather. This was the moment he had finally pushed too far. When Cruz pried open the door and helped him out, the reality hit. He was shaking uncontrollably. Not from pain, but from the realization that he'd come inches from a career-ending, life-ending impact. The crash wasn't just violent, it was humbling. Doctors ordered rest. Fans urged him to slow down. His team asked whether they should pause events at the Freedom Factory. But the biggest change came from Garrett himself. For the first time in years, he questioned the persona he had built, the fearless daredevil who laughed in the face of danger. The crash didn't end him, but it forced him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. Even heroes break. And sometimes the most important skill isn't driving through chaos. It's knowing when to lift. Grounded by the FAA.